As Far as Anyone Knows is a mostly Latino history podcast where each week your hosts, Minerva Angeles
and Fredo B,
take turns sharing some Latino history,
bad jokes,
and ancestral love. Hello, and welcome to another episode of As Far as Anyone Knows. I'm your host, Minerva Angeles.
And I'm Fredo B.
And we are not telling you a story today.
Today, we are joined by Emmy Award winner Sandra Robbie, who is going to tell us about a 1940s civil rights case that impacted the entire country.
Stay tuned. Sandra will be with us in a moment.
Thank you. E-person, I don't know how you say this.
Yeah,
virtually.
Yeah. It's good to see your face.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about yesterday. In my haste, I didn't put the right email address. So
no, I think that's totally understandable. I'm just glad we can do this. I'm honestly super grateful. I can't believe we're here and that this is actually happening. I'm thrilled and I'm so excited to have you on the show. All right, so we're gonna get kicked off and do a little introduction on you, and then whatever you'd like to add into that introduction. We're always very, very happy with people letting us know more and more wonderful things about themselves, and then we're gonna ask you to tell us about the great story that you're here to tell us about today.
Okay,
great.
Okay, everyone. Hi. Today we are joined by Sandra Robbie, an Emmy Award-winning writer-director of the Mendez versus Westminster documentary. She's a civil rights activist, champion, who
has received White House honors, consulted on a commemorative Mendez U.S. postal stamp, and is on a mission to get this story out to as many people as possible.
And we're here to help with that.
Let's hope so. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sandra. Is there anything else you want to make sure we know about your beautiful mission here with the Mendez versus Westminster case?
Well, I have actually been to the White House when the Mendez case was honored, and through my efforts, we're able to make that happen. So I have not actually received honors from the White House, but I have helped to get honors for Mendez. So
that's good.
I just want to make sure that's okay. But I'm a Mendez maniac, and I love this story, and I am so excited that you've invited me to participate to share about this history.
Great.
Absolutely, because when we heard about this case, it definitely fell in line with our mission for the podcast, where we want to make sure that we are telling those stories that were kind of sort of forgotten to history, right? Or just are not really talked about. They're kind of on the fringe, and you really have to go digging for them. So I'm so super excited for you to tell our audience about this case.
Yeah. And I also just want to commend you and your just continued work to get this information out there, because not only have you done this documentary that was released, what year did this documentary come out?
2002.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been out since 2002, and you are continuing the tireless work of getting the information out there. I just want to be clear. We came across this amazing woman when we were just doing our weekly chat clubhouse, our weekly clubhouse chats, where we just kind of go over the podcast stuff and just whatever with Latino history. And she pops into this room with this ball of energy. I immediately fell in love with her energy. I just have to be clear about that. And, kind of introduced herself and her own history, in her existence, but then really got into, Mendez versus Westminster, and, was able to give a really good elevator speech very quickly, gave us an intro on what we would be, what we would be getting from her, and then encouraged everybody in that room to go ahead and watch that documentary, which we definitely did. And we fell in love with her work, And we thought this is definitely a story that needs to be told. And what better person to tell it than Sandra Robbie herself?
Well, thank you so much. So are you guys ready for the story?
Absolutely.
Do it.
Okay, so Mendez versus Westminster. So a little background is that I grew up in Westminster. If you guys aren't familiar with Orange County, Westminster is right next to Huntington Beach, if you've heard of that place. And Disneyland, we're about 15, 20 minutes away from Disneyland, if you've ever heard of that place. And so we moved to Westminster. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. I moved to Westminster when I was little, when I was just one. And elementary school, junior high, high school, all in Westminster schools. Went to UC Santa Barbara. Never heard of the Mendez case until I was a mom with small children of my own. And I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table one day, reading an article that was talking about a school that was going to be built named in honor of the Mendez family. And I don't know if you've ever had a moment where you learned something about somebody or someplace that you felt you knew intimately. And this something was so opposite everything you ever believed that it just blew your mind. Well, that's what happened to me as I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table, reading about segregation that happened in my hometown, segregation that my history books never mentioned, and that this case helped to pave the way to Brown versus Board of Education, which there is no bigger civil rights case that is discussed in our history books. And this case helped to make that happen. It involved Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren. In my mind, I was screaming, does it get bigger than this? And I could feel the walls spinning. And when I looked up from the newspaper that day, so many emotions went through me. And I am a Latina. I am fourth generation English speaking. My grandmother was born in Arizona the year before it became a state. But I felt anger, and I felt I'd been lied to. I'd been deceived. I was robbed of a story that could change the way I felt about everything and my place in American society and what's possible for me. And I feel fortunate in that I was old enough to know that if I am feeling this way, that there are thousands and thousands of others who will also feel this way. So anger, sadness, shame, guilt, even though I wasn't born at the time of Mendez, I felt like somehow I had done something that warranted being treated differently and less than. And then I felt a sense of pride and excitement in knowing that people like me and like my family and my community, people of all colors, came together to end an injustice that didn't just change our community, but ended up impacting the nation, and through that, through our world. So at the time I learned of Mendez, I didn't know how, I didn't know what, I didn't know when, but I knew that by the time I was done, everybody was going to know about Mendez. And it was also, it felt like a lot of, like a download of so many life truths as I was learning about the Mendez case and reading it in that paper that day. And one of the things I have to say that has sustained me in the long game of getting Mendez taught in our schools is that I had the benefit of being in a social movements class at UC Santa Barbara, where one of our professors was very involved in the 60s movements. And he said to our class one day, "My students don't like to hear this, but you need to know that history takes time." And when he said that, in my mind in class, I'm going, what do you mean it takes time? We don't have time for time. Things are all messed up. But the morning I learned of Mendez, I understood what he meant. Oh my gosh, this is what happened. The Mendez case started they were turned away in 43. The case started in 45, the federal decision in 46, the appeal in 47, Brown in 54, Little Rock in 57, the American Civil Rights Act in 64. If I want Mendez taught in our schools, I'm going to have to get started now, because institutional change will take at least 15 to 20 years. So now I was the world's oldest intern, I always say, at our public television station when I finally did do a documentary on Mendez. And so here is the story now. So in 1943, it was during World War II, and the Munumitsu family was being sent to an internment camp at Poston, Arizona. And their banker approached Mr. Mendez, who owned a cantina in Santa Ana, and said, "Mr. Mendez, you have always been the grape picker and the orange picker, and you have said that you would like to be the boss of a ranch one day. The Munumitsus are going to lose everything if they can't find somebody to lease their land." And so Mr. Mendez spoke with his wife, and they agreed to sell their cantina, and they moved with their extended family to a 40-acre farm in Westminster, where they grew chilies and peppers and all kinds of produce. And so when they moved to Westminster, actually they drove out to Poston, Arizona to arrange for the lease agreement. And when they came back to Westminster, Aunt Sally took all of the children to the Westminster school to be enrolled for classes. But the school officials said, Mrs. Vidori, we will take your children, but the Mendez children will have to go to the Mexican school. And Mrs. Vidori said, well, why will you take my children? Mrs. Vidori had married a Mexican who was part French. And so they had a French last name, and their children were light-skinned and had light hair. But the Mendez children had dark skin and dark hair. And even though they were all born in America and they all spoke English, they would have to go to the Mexican school, which was inferior in every way. It was like a dilapidated shack near a cow pasture where all the flies there. They had dilapidated books. The curriculum was really intended to train them to be domestic help or to work as manual laborers. And so when Mrs. Vidori said, well, if you won't take my children, then my brother's children, then my children aren't going to stay. So she came back home and told Mr. Mendez, Gonzalo Mendez, about this. And he said, oh, there must be a mistake. I'll go talk to them tomorrow. Well, it turns out there wasn't a mistake. The school district, Westminster School District, said, no, we won't take your children. He spoke with the superintendent of the school. They said no. They went to the Department of Ed. Everybody said no. This is the way we do it in Westminster. So they did keep their children out of the schools for a while, but he was speaking about it with one of the truck drivers for the produce. And he said, well, I know of an attorney, David Marcus, who fought to end segregation in public pools and parks in San Bernardino County. And he fought a housing discrimination case actually in Fullerton. I'm sure if we speak with him, he will agree to take on the case. So David Marcus was a Jewish lawyer who graduated from USC, and he himself had faced many instances of segregation and discrimination. So he took on the case, and they decided to take it as a class action suit, which means that there are several plaintiffs who have similar complaints. And it involved 5 families, the Mendez, Estrada, Guzman, Palomino, and Ramirez families, and 4 school districts, Santa Ana, Garden Grove, El Medina, and Westminster. And they filed the court brief, and in the federal court in Los Angeles, they won. And a Judge McCormick said that American freedom is not born of the same books and buildings. It's born of social equality. They must mix. And so then the school districts appealed, and it went to the Ninth Circuit Court. And at that time, it attracted the attention of many civil rights groups who were fighting discrimination cases, including the NAACP. And the NAACP, with Thurgood Marshall and the Legal Defense Fund, they had a generations-long strategy to end segregation of Black children, which was born of slavery and all the Jim Crow laws. But their strategy was they were starting with colleges because they did not feel if they started with grade schools that they would ever have a chance, because white families did not want their little white girls to go to school with little Black boys. So they were taking it at the university level and working their way down. So when they found out about this case that was dealing with elementary schools, they said, we've got to help. And so they wrote a friend of the court brief that they submitted to Mendez. And at the Ninth Circuit Court, the Mendez plaintiffs won again. However, the Ninth Circuit Court was not willing to go as far as Judge McCormick had said in saying that segregation per se is unconstitutional. What they said was that Mexican children are actually white. They're not Black, they're not Asian, they're Caucasian. So if Mexican children are Caucasian, you cannot keep them from attending the white schools. And so, yeah,
we're trying not to react right now.
Yeah. So that was the decision. So, so California did not have specific laws that allowed for segregating Mexicans. And so since they were deemed white, they couldn't keep them from going to the white schools. But California did have laws at the time that allowed for segregating Asian Americans and Native Americans, which is another thing our history books never talk about. It's always about the Black and white struggle in the South. And the truth is that all of the segregation that happened in the South happened all across the United States, and different groups were targeted. So for example, in Old Town Orange, where I just was today, it's like a time capsule from the segregation era. Old Town Orange is just 4 miles from Disneyland. And in that place, you can see one of the last standing Mexican school buildings. you can see a formerly segregated movie theater where Anglos had to where Anglos sat in the main floor and Mexicans had to sit in the balcony. You can see a formerly segregated swimming pool where Monday was Mexican Day and then the pool would be cleaned and made available to Anglos the rest of the week. So this was common across the country. And so when the Mendez case won, the governor of California at the time was a gentleman named Earl Warren. And so Earl Warren is most famously known in our history books as the governor of California, a Republican governor, who was one of the chief proponents of the Japanese internment. And he is also known as the Supreme Court justice who later led the 9-0 decision to desegregate our nation. So in our history books, whenever they talk about Brown versus Board of Education, they say, oh, we're getting this conservative Supreme Court justice. What's he going to do? Well, what they failed to mention is at the time of the Mendez case, Earl Warren was the governor. And the Attorney General of the state of California was instructed by him to file a friend of the court brief in favor of the Mendez plaintiffs. So when the case won in California, even though it only applied to 4 school districts in Orange County, 2 months to the day after the Ninth Circuit Court appeal won, Earl Warren signed a bill that repealed the segregation statutes for schools that existed on California's books. So he ended segregation, outlawed segregation for Asian Americans and Native Americans, making California the first state to outlaw school segregation. And then 7 years later, when he was on the Supreme Court, spoiler alert, his decision for Brown versus Board of Education was born in his decision to desegregate California 7 years before he arrived at the court. And so that, in a few brief minutes, is the story of Mendez versus Westminster.
I love the way you tell the story, because that was a really great summary of a lot of details.
Absolutely. And I guess let's parse some of those details out, because I think for our audience, they, I want them to get the magnitude of this for sure, because it is extremely important. And so I do like that in the documentary it was mentioned, and you just mentioned it now, that so much of our history, when the very brief history that we're taught about the civil rights movement, is such a dichotomy, right? It's a black or white issue. When we know it's extremely complex. There was all these groups, Latino, Native American, Asians, gay, trans. There was all these movements going on, fighting to be equal, to have rights as straight, cis white men and women. But that part gets erased. So I'm glad that's why we're here to tell that story. But Minerva, do you have a question that you want to get clarity on?
Yeah, so I think we have a few questions, but I think you did a good job explaining to us what your inspiration was, in leading this entire project, and how you continue to push this project. So I just want to reiterate that I am incredibly inspired by you and by your work. And this is just going to make me kind of continue to push the stuff we're doing, because it's just another person, you just like being around like-minded people who want to push similar ideas and want to get this stuff out there. And sometimes this work can be kind of lonely. So it's really nice to find other people looking at that. And I want to make sure we highlighted that. And so there's so many thoughts I have about this the entire idea of segregation, right? Because, a lot of it was happening illegally, right? And I'm, for the part of this that's going to be audio, I'm making my famous air quotes that I like to describe that are happening, because it's a podcast, so most of the time I'm telling people what I'm doing with my hands. So one thing is, I do believe that this segregation continues today in some ways, right? We see it with redlining, we see it with a lot of intentionality in city planning. I know, we're from New York, so we definitely have a lot of history with Robert Moses, for example. I'm not sure if you know too much about him, but he's got like a really long history of building highways and large obstructions to divide neighborhoods strategically, and any kind of like roadways or bus routes, subway lines. These were all very strategically laid out to make sure we can either divide neighborhoods or decrease access to certain neighborhoods. So, and I think this, because of that, because you can't move highways very easily, this stuff continues today, even though of course it's, we've definitely kind of moved around a little bit. You can see it even in the school buildings, and there's even like, I think the Times and like Serial got together and did a whole podcast called Nice White Parents about this, of how like, people get into neighborhoods and they gentrify, and then they come in and they like steamroll schools in some ways. So schools that were once, similar compared to the way that you described, like the Mexican school, I'm putting up air quotes again, you guys. And then, in comparison, how that, into the school that did have resources, to the quote unquote white school, that they kind of transformed these schools with it's like, oh, all of a sudden there's resources, what do you know? Anyway, so my point about this, well, I guess I have like two kind of like questions about it. One is, what are your thoughts about just like modern day segregation and how that looks? I don't know if that looks different in California, so you can also let me know what your experience is nowadays with it. And then I also, because I think they did a funny little thing there with the word Caucasian, that maybe I'll leave for like, I will do my second part of that question because it's so complex, after you, share your thoughts on modern day segregation.
So yes, there are many things in society that are purposely segregated. People set up, city planning. I'm sure that it happened in New York. Well, I shouldn't be saying, but I should ask. But in California, they had on many properties what are called racially restrictive covenants. And those covenants would say, if you are not white, you may not buy a house in this neighborhood, or you may not purchase this house. Or it might say, you may not purchase this house if you are Black or Jewish. I had somebody tell me that they purchased a house in Santa Monica, that the covenant said that if you are of Latin descent, you may only live in this house if you are a domestic servant. So the racially restrictive covenants were varied, but existed up until about the late 60s. And I have to say, I'm a little bit torn, because somebody is working to try to have those covenants expunged from the deed so that people won't see them. And I don't know how I feel about that, because once they're gone, who's going to see them and who's going to remember? And that's how it'll disappear. Like the Holocaust didn't happen.
Right.
And so I understand that it's painful to see it, but I think that it's more dangerous to have it disappear.
Absolutely.
We agree 100% with that. Yeah.
So that's where I am with that. But also, I think one of the life truths that became apparent to me in learning about Mendez as well is that as human beings, we are hardwired to segregate ourselves, that we move toward people who are similar to us and away from people who we perceive to be different from us. Yeah. And so for a lot of the neighborhoods, especially if you're coming into this country and you may not be documented, where is it easier for you to live without being seen? And that's going to be in a neighborhood that looks like people like you. So, and I also try to be aware of that when I go out into the world, that it's going to be it could be my fallback. So I always make an effort, like say if I'm attending conferences or when I'm taking classes, to sit in a place that would be different or not necessarily with people I know. I make that effort every day. So it's a yin yang thing. It's both. It's people segregating us and it's people segregating ourselves. And so we have to be aware of that. And we have to tame our minds, tame our brain to do that thing which may not be your first choice, consciously or unconsciously. And of course, I always want to have people do things that they feel are safe. However, when Black Lives Matter was happening, well, it's still happening, but I remember when there were a lot of intense conversations going on, somebody in the room said, well, do what your, what was the word that they said? They said, well, follow what your heart says. If you feel unsafe or something, then, do that. And I said, well, I want you to stop and think about that, because doing what makes you feel comfortable is the way that the segregation has persisted. And I'm not saying that you should do something that is unsafe, but if you want to end hurtful prejudices and generalizations, what you have been thinking is uncomfortable and wrong is keeping you from knowing more about people who are not dangerous and that you may have more in common with than what your habits or boxes have told you in the past. So I guess that's my thought. I just know that it's a human condition, and that it's not just an American thing. It's not just a white thing. That as a Latina myself, I know that I was called Prieta all the time growing up. And my mom also was called Prieta. And she knew, she was told explicitly by Mexicans in her community that she was not as attractive because of her skin color than others. So I guess I just see it as a totally human thing, and that we have to be conscious and aware. And it's a big issue to confront. And I don't want to peg it on any one group, because it's about all of us. And I guess that's where I am.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that, in line with that thinking, when, as Minerva and I go through this journey of discovering, our history, our collective history as Latinos and Latin Americans in the United States, one of the things we're struck with is really how difficult it must have been for people who were pioneering this, who were moving forward first, right? And while watching the documentary, and I want you to, I'm hoping that you could be able to talk a little bit more in detail about the roles that people played in the family. So, because, so many times, and when we were to learning and talking about Dolores Huerta, for example, one of the things that comes up is like, you're out there, doing this activism, or you're fighting the machine, but you still have a family to take care of, right? You still have responsibilities to your home. So I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit more and expound a little bit more on what the roles were that, for example, that Mrs. Mendez played while Mr. Mendez Gonzalo was out there with the lawyers and doing these court hearings.
So I'm glad you mentioned Dolores Huerta, because I had the great opportunity to meet her a couple of times. And I don't know if you saw the documentary on her, that she had 11 children and she left them in the care of other people. And that was heartbreaking to me, but this work was something that consumed her, and she was able to help to forward many changes that impacted lots of people because of her work. So in the Mendez case, Mr. Mendez was out doing a lot of the organizing for the case, and a lot of the men, because men played that role predominantly in the court case. Like, for example, when we talk about Brown versus Board of Education, Brown was a class action suit as well. And we only talk about one family, but there were actually over 80 families involved. And I understand that when they picked who was going to be the lead plaintiff, that they picked the Brown family because the father was a minister, and, the children. So the whole optics of it would seem more sellable, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? That in the courts, they would see that and be able to recognize that. But there were many men leading the charge in their case as well. So Mrs. Mendez, who was Puerto Rican, she helped to run the farm. So that was the role for a lot of the women in the cases. Like with the Barrios family, Mr. Barrios, they had a store and they had a lot of political meetings in their store. And Mrs. Barrios was running the store for them. And so a lot of the work was being performed by women because the men were consumed with organizing the case. So it really is about, everybody pitching in and doing what they can for the case. And I'd just like to mention, though, too, that, the Mendez case is one story in the long chapter of American civil rights history, but Mendez is not the first successful school desegregation case for Latinos. There's another case that we've heard about, I've known for a while, Lemon Grove, and that took place in 1931 in San Diego County, but it stayed only in the San Diego district. It didn't go to the Ninth Circuit Court, so it stayed local. And another case that we've recently heard about is in 1913, a case in Colorado, and I have to think of the name. I'm gonna have to write it down. But there was a case that happened there. And then I just heard of another case in the 1880s, like 88 or something. I think it was before Plessy, maybe 1885. And it was Tape versus, I can't think of their name now too, but it was with Chinese Americans. So successful school desegregation cases have been taking place for a long time in our nation. But one of the things I love about Mendez is that this shows people of all colors with similar obstacles. That the Japanese family was being sent to an internment camp. The Mendez family was turned away from the white school. They had a Jewish lawyer. This was taking place during World War II and the Holocaust. The NAACP was involved. Earl Warren, who was a white guy, all of this stuff. I mean, for me, what's really powerful about the story is it finally desegregates the way we talk about American civil rights history. And for me, that is what the American civil rights struggle is all about. For us to see how all of us connect and make a difference for each other. And that's, for me, the biggest lesson I'm hoping that can come out of the Mendez case.
Yeah, I do want to say that's probably one of the things that also really struck me in this case in general, just the interconnectedness and the opportunities that were presented just by people of color for people of color. The Japanese family helping the Puerto Rican and Mexican family out, while like they were down and out. They're going to an internment camp. And by that way, I mean, you're thinking that's like the worst thing that family is probably going through in their family situation, and they're thinking, how can I help someone else? And they choose this family who they know is going to take care of their land, which from a Native standpoint is also really beautiful. Like only like other Native people could really understand the beauty in taking care of land and trusting that someone else is going to take care of land that way. So I was very much inspired by that. And then the idea of just all these civil rights activists getting together and just using this case as precedent for another case later on that would be monumental on a federal level. That to me was just like, this is exactly what it looks like. I mean, I'm from Queens, New York. That's what it looks like. That's what my life looks like. It's just people of color helping people of color. So I just thought that was really beautiful and aligns really beautifully with what you were saying about how, like, there are legs of this work that we are responsible for, right? And that there are, when we talk about desegregation, there are parts of this work that we can do ourselves. And that's to say that we all grow up with a lot of stuff we have to decolonize, right? And I'm sure that there were things, or there are things that continue to exist between like the Asian community and the Latino community, the Black community, and it's hard to say, I would say African American community and Latino community because there are Black Latinos. And so, there's like all this stuff that we kind of deal with and stereotype and blah, 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 with all the like, whatever the, the narratives that we have historically heard, and how, a lot of the decolonizing in ourselves is really sort of challenging those ideas on our level. And we know that there are systematically things that need to improve that a lot of people of color can help improve. But like, we know that whiteness has a lot of work to do in general. Probably more that the biggest leg or several legs of the work need to be taken care of by that. But but we know that where we can decolonize, that's what we need to do, you know? And so I think that was a really great, you know, example in history of when that has worked out really well for us, just working together, when that has worked out really beautifully for us in moments where it's not an ideal situation, right? It's not ideal that these people were in an internment camp. It's not ideal that these children and families were dealing with segregated schools. And it's not ideal that, you know, it was desegregated in California and nowhere else. But, you know, these amazing people were able to take it from that state level and use it as precedent for the federal level. You know, that's really, really something. So I guess that'll kind of lead into my weird Caucasian question.
I'm ready. Bring some weird Caucasian questions.
It was just weird. So it's not that weird, right? Because there are white Latinos, right? So we're not going to sit here and be like, I don't know what a white Latino. We're not doing that.
Yeah, my dad looks like my brothers and sister. I have a brother and sister that are, and like my sister, when she was wearing shorts the other day. I could not believe how white she was.
Yes, you should see my legs. Yeah. I'm probably up your sister's alley. I reflect light. So again, I know culturally and ethnically and obviously racially diverse my history. My family's from the Dominican Republic. So like, I know exactly who I am and where I'm from and where, you know, what my history is. I look around my family, I know exactly who we are, but I know that I look white, right? So I know that comes with privilege. So I'm not going to sit here and just do this thing of like, there's no such thing as white Latinos or anything like that. And like, we're not going to, whatever. But we know that that's a sensitive area because, you know, just because we bear, you know, the face of a colonizer doesn't mean that we don't have, you know, different history and that we don't have the influence of course, all of our ancestors in us, right? So not to get too much into that part of the conversation, because I want to focus on what people see and what privilege that brings you, right? So one, it was very interesting that the part of the family that was lighter skinned with lighter hair and had the French last name, they were like good to go because they had like passed whatever, you know, whatever test exists that allowed that situation for them, which was 100% visual and 100% based on whoever was like processing your paperwork that day, is what it sounds like. And then of course the other part of the family, which, you know, we did see the documentary, and we are totally going to make all of you listeners, and maybe if you're viewing this, you just like, it's going to be like in the link. We're going to make sure we link it. You need to watch it because it is important for you to see it. There's a lot of good stuff in there. But you could actually see the family, and they are very brown. So I'm watching this brown family talk, and then the guy at one point says the thing about, you know, no, Mexicans are considered Caucasian.
Yeah, it was decided that the Mexicans are Caucasian, and I'm just like,
I was like, are you looking at the same people I'm looking at?
Okay.
And
I mean, they're Caucasian until they're not, because if a black Mexican would show up.
And so that's, you know, that's the thing. There are black Mexicans, right? There are black people born and raised in Mexico for several centuries. What are you talking about? Like, so yeah. So one, I think you did a great job in the documentary going over the binary thing. You know, obviously you like getting into detail would veer us off from the topic of the Mendez situation in general. But if you want to spend some time on that right now, I would love it, because this fascinates me. This American binary of black and white. It's fascinating because obviously no one of mixed race exists, of course. And then, you know, we're completely exiting out of the narrative our native ancestors. And which, you know, arguably there's a large percentage of Mexicans that are native, like they didn't move. They just like always lived in California.
Exactly.
So, talk to me about like what your thoughts are on just that label of that Caucasian thing, and what you all think about that.
Well, I guess because my mom and dad are both Mexican American. My grandmother on my dad's side, I understand that she's Mayan. She was a very light skin. She had light brown hair. She was like 4'10". She didn't break my feet. I remember going to her house, and her cabinetry was sized to her, so it was like a doll's house. We would go there as a child. So it was the best thing. It was like a playhouse. But the Caucasian thing, I have to, because my dad is light skinned, like my dad looked more like Ricky Ricardo, you know, and so, but my mom was dark skinned. So the idea of the Caucasian thing didn't really blow me away or anything, because I just knew it was a semantics detail. But I think what was interesting is that what happened after the Mendez case was won, there were several other states that were starting to argue their desegregation as well. So the state of Texas took the Mendez case and said, okay, if Mexicans are Caucasian, that means they're white. And so what we'll do is we'll have the Black kids go to the Mexican schools, which are white schools now, and that will be integration.
Wow. Okay.
And so then they tried to argue that in court, and they said, no, not so much. So it's all words. You know, that's the whole thing. I guess that what I've just learned from Mendez, mostly for me, is that, was it right to segregate kids back in the 1800s? No. Was slavery right? Was Jim Crow, was that right? No. Has it ever been right? No. So, but they're still trying to layer arguments and logic until they say, okay, it's not okay. So people can spill words and say things to justify any prejudice that they want. Yeah. But is it right until the courts say it's not? It's still not right. Yeah. So I guess that's the thing, is that when people talk about activist judges, they're all activist judges. They're making decisions based on who and where they are at this time in history. Yeah. So, because I remember even 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago now, it was 25 years ago, 26 years ago, walking with my son to go visit my Uncle Danny, who, Latino, he died of AIDS. And Latinos are notoriously known to be homophobic. But I am fortunate to be from a family that was never, we never grew up that way. Uncle Danny, we never discussed that he was gay. It was ours to figure out on our own as kids growing up, but Uncle Danny was loved, expected everywhere. I mean, I equate my Uncle Danny with See's Candy. You guys don't have See's Candy out in New York. No. I don't think it's a California thing, but it's this chocolate candy that every holiday, every birthday, everything, you know, Uncle Danny brought that big double 2 pound of candy. And
awesome.
When he died of AIDS, I remember thinking, you know, I don't know if I'm going to live to see gay marriage, because in my mind, what was necessary for the AIDS epidemic to end was for society to accept and acknowledge the humanity of all of us, and to allow our LGBTQ people to marry and form bonds that were recognized and respected in our communities. And so now 25, 26 years later, here we are, finally, you know, gay marriage is legal. Has homosexuality been wrong all along? No, it's just new awareness and new thinking. And so I guess that's just where I come from. So the Caucasian thing doesn't bother me so much, because I just look at it as being like, we're all making this stuff up anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a social construct, right?
Yeah, it's all a social construct. Like if somebody says, you have no common sense, that's a social construct. Your sense of what's common sense is based on your experience, and the extent to which you and I have not had the same experience. It's a social construct. You're trying to diminish my experience in favor of yours because you think yours is the right way. And that's just, it's human.
Yeah.
But it's not respectful.
No, I have, I think for me, the reason why I always find it, just anytime that our history of whether or not we quote unquote get to be Caucasian, that has always fascinated me because it's such it's one of the most effective tools of colonization. And we're just still up in this web, and we're still like just getting all tangled up in it, like day after day, year after year, century after century, we just continue to participate in the binary. And we know this. We know that there's a lot of racism and colorism in Latin America. And this is something that we kind of have to continue to deal with if we're going to dismantle the system, right? Because we know that the system, we kind of always root it back to capitalism. That's like my favorite topic on the show is to root it all back to capitalism. But but we know that white supremacist delusion is like the number one tool of capitalism, and what it fuels is this continued oppression of certain people. How do we do that? We create a ladder. Who's on the ladder? Who cares? We'll make it up as we go along. And whoever we hurt as we do that, it doesn't matter because it serves capitalism. So, it really made me think about that when you gave us that tidbit on what the quote unquote Mexican schools were teaching, and, all those basically teaching the children how to be successful in the service industry, essentially, how to serve other people, because we understand that that's like the angle of what we want them to continue to do. And it definitely made me think of, I was a teacher. There was a part of my life where I used to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And one of the books that I had to read in my studies, which I'm so grateful for having been introduced to this book, is the pedagogy. I don't know which way to pronounce that word, whoever prefers that. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, who I think is a Brazilian writer. Mm-hmm. And it really rang for, like, as soon as you said that, like I was immediately like, pedagogy of the oppressed. Yep. Because it is like a systematic curriculum, if I may, that is designed to keep us or to keep certain people on a particular path. Mm-hmm. And then we can tie that to the prison industrial complex. We can talk, the school to prison pipeline, which I know we're not going to get into right now. But it's just, I know I'm getting all civil rights geeky, but and I promise listeners we will talk more about those things I just said. But all of that rang to me because this system is so complex, it's so intricate. Mm-hmm. That it's just every time you pull another piece out, you find another knot somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you have to undo that one, and then there's another one under that one. And it's a terrible analogy. I hope you guys know what I mean by that.
Yeah,
but what I mean is like that, it's messy on purpose. Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to feel cumbersome, and it's supposed to feel like there's nothing we can do to fix it. And we're supposed to sort of feel helpless. Mm-hmm. And so I'm here to just be like, no.
but that's why I think
not be helpless.
Stories like this are, of interest to me, because you have people, is like the whole Goliath of David versus Goliath, right? The fact that Mr. Mendez Gonzalo didn't take no for an answer. I think a lot of families, many families would have just been like, okay, I guess my kid will go to the Mexican school. But he was like, no, fuck that. my kid is entitled to the same education.
And there's a couple things that in 30 minutes, you can't tell all of the story and mm-hmm. stuff. But one of the things I know from the inside is that, like, you probably have heard of the saying, one man's ceiling is another man's floor. Have you heard mm-hmm. that saying? Yeah. So similarly with Mendez, like you may have heard too, like that World War II was a watershed for desegregation, in that when soldiers of color came back from fighting in Europe and they faced segregation, they weren't having it anymore. They had put their lives on the line to end injustices for others, and then to come home and to face that here, not happening. Well, having had the experience of and the knowledge of their value and worth, they would not accept it any longer. And similarly, that's what happened for Mr. Mendez. Because what I was not able to say is that Mr. Mendez had grown up in Westminster, and he had attended the 17th Street School when he was a child. And so when his children came back to attend the school and they said no, That's not happening. But even more than that, he had a wife who was Puerto Rican, and Puerto Ricans are fully fledged in their American status. And so I understand that when she came home, when Aunt Sally came home and said, they won't accept your children, I understand that Mrs. Mendez was something like, are you going to let them treat your children that way? Is that going to be okay? And so that was it. But also, I even want to go back to Sally Vidori, because Sally Vidori is the Rosa Parks in this story. She's the one who said, no, if you're not going to take my children, if you're not going to take my brother's children, my children aren't going here.
Yeah.
So this is a woman who sort of lit the fuse as well.
Yeah.
She didn't just let it sit there. She moved it. So this is one of the things that, like I said, I'm most adamant in Mendez, is that the Mendez family is the lead plaintiff in the case. However, every player on the team played an important role in making this possible. And so one of the things that I really try to talk to students about, especially when they are in a situation now where it seems like there's so much to do and it feels hopeless, I try to share with them that you need to be willing to start something that you may never see to conclusion. You will never see your name in a history book, but your contribution is essential and pivotal. And so I have to say that, and I don't mean any disrespect to the Mendez family when I say this, but the work you are doing right now is as important as what the Mendez family did, because your words and your intentions send a ripple out into the future that make that possible. And that there were cases that were fought before Mendez that may have lost, that we will never hear about. But without them, those attitudes would not be changing. The Mendez family was on an escalator of cases that were moving forward, and they happened to be the one that tipped over with Marcus and everybody else in place. And so I want to honor you. And when I go into the community, every single person I see that smiles at me, that opens a door, that makes place for me, they are making history every day and making my freedom possible. And I want to honor and respect them as much as the people who are part of the Mendez case. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Absolutely,
Oh
absolutely.
my God.
I love it.
We are so happy you're here with us. You have no idea.
Yeah.
This is just an honor. It is such a blessing. I just want to be clear, like this is the work. What you do and how relentless you are with is just it is a continuous gracious pressure. Beautiful. Beautiful. This is what we need to continue to do. I'm so inspired by you. Oh, this is so great.
So, I mean, I guess in terms of wrapping up, but because I want to give a chance for you to kind of plug what you're doing now and how people could get involved with this, right? But one of the things that I always ask myself, especially like with stories that are so incredible that I'm like, how did we not know about this? So with this case, in your, in just totally your opinion, why do you think this case, this story was kind of lost?
Well, there are a lot of reasons this case has not happened. And part of it, I mean, there's so many reasons, but one of them is, in our history books, they talk to us, they say we teach history so that the pat answer is so that we don't repeat it. Well, that's one of the reasons we teach history. One of the main reasons we teach history is to inculcate people in a narrative that tells you who America is, vision, values, and goals. So they tell us who we're going to learn about, what we're going to admire about them, and, to create a picture of who we are as America. Additionally, so the American narrative has been that the civil rights struggle is a black and white issue. And so everything else falls away from there. But additionally, we have a different sense today of what history is, because here's another example. So the whole Columbus Day controversy. So we all know now, looking at from the lens where we are, that, here is a tyrant, murderous killer who became an American hero. And we don't even know how did that happen. And I have to say, years ago when I was studying a diversity class, I wanted to figure out that too. I said, well, who even promoted this guy? Where did this come from? Because my parents got married on Columbus Day because my mom worked for the federal government. She would always have that day off. So I went back and I did some research, and the way that this happened, and I've seen one essay write it this way, but this is the conclusion I came to first, is that Italian Americans were targeted for hate. Mm-hmm. They were lynched. Mm-hmm. They were disparaged in every way. And so they were looking for a way to win their American status. And so they said, hey, we got this guy Columbus. If it wasn't for him, none of y'all would be here. And so we should celebrate Columbus. And this is when America was trying to develop its story, its folklore. It was a new country. And so they promoted the celebration of Columbus. It was like the first multicultural celebration before America had the word multicultural. And when you read the New York Times from the days of the first Columbus Day celebration, it was a 4-day celebration. They had a parade in the harbor. They had a children's parade. They had a night parade. They had parades all over the place. And people were sitting in the hot sun waiting for late parades and making room for each other. And you could hear everybody speaking in their languages, and everybody was getting along. For New York, you know what kind of power that is for New Yorkers to be getting along? But this Columbus Day celebration made that happen. And they're talking about everybody waving their flags. And so that's how it happened. And Italian Americans became part of American culture as their whiteness became accepted. Mm-hmm. So with the stories that we tell, we are evolving. And so Mendez fell away, even like we don't have, at the time when the books were being born too, we didn't have a sense of, oh, that story is going to be a book and a movie tomorrow. We didn't have that sense then. And so we do now. And I think that we have a clearer understanding of the power of the stories we tell. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the other life truths that came apparent to me, is that the stories we tell us who we are and who we can be. And when we don't include stories of people of all colors, children of all abilities, people of every culture, we are telling them that they don't matter, that their contributions in America have no value. And I am adamantly with everything that I have, that if they're going to teach Mendez, I want to make sure they include the Japanese Americans. I want to make sure that they include the Jewish lawyer. I want to make sure that they show this story and say, how does this impact you? How did this make this story open the door for you? That's what I want Mendez to be about, opening the doors and taking down the walls to show our connection. That's my goal.
Great. So, I guess tell us now what exactly you're working on today.
So right now I'm working on a project called Plant Peace, and it's to honor for the 75-year anniversary of Mendez versus Westminster. We're going to celebrate it the Disney way, because the federal decision was in 1946. The appeal was in 1947. So we're going to do a whole 2-year thing celebrating Mendez to work to get this taught in our schools. And so just today, even, I was out at Old Town Orange. I've planted 5,009 sunflower seeds to represent the 5,000 children and the plaintiffs, the attorneys, Thurgood Marshall, Earl Warren, and the Japanese American families who were interned during World War II, to send out into the community. And during April, because April 14th is the anniversary of the Ninth Circuit Court. And then June 14th is the anniversary of the date when Earl Warren signed the bill to desegregate our schools. So we're giving out 5,000 sunflower seedlings to people in the community to plant in their yards, to plant peace, and to recognize that it takes all of us every day. And it's a mindful intention to plant peace, to cultivate it so that it will grow in our communities. And so we're giving those out, and then we'll be doing some more things. I want to do a watch one over the summer to encourage all of America to just, if you want to watch one thing in America, watch Mendez versus Westminster, so that we can all get on the same page. Mm-hmm. So watch one over the summer. And then in Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm going to be doing Random Act of Mendez to celebrate the history of Mendez. And then next year, it may be Random Act of Marcus, which is the attorney who fought the case. And then after that, it may be Random Act of Munamitsu, so that we can pay attention to everybody that's involved in the histories around us and to honor them. That's my goal, is to see that we can find ways to do that respectfully and celebrate, because I'm all about the party. Don't you? Yeah. I am all about the party.
Yeah, we're here for it. Yeah, right. we might plant something for Mendez. That's what we have a little yard. We got you.
All right.
We're gonna post about it.
I love sunflowers.
Yeah. We will.
All right.
And can people find information about what you're doing with Mendez on your social media, on your website?
Yes, I started a TikTok, and those are my little pooches outside. I think someone's coming home.
Yeah.
So I got a TikTok going. I'm going to update my website so they can see on the website what's happening. Feel free to DM me. I'm on Instagram, Sandra Robbie, Robbie. It looks like Robbie. We say Robbie. And my TikTok. Yeah, I'm learning how to figure that out, but it's fun. I love it.
We're going to link.
Thank you so much. And Clubhouse.
Yes. We're going to link all of your, well, we can't link like people's profiles on Clubhouse yet, but we are going to link your profile on Instagram. We're going to link your TikTok, and we're going to link your website, and we are going to link the YouTube link directly to the Mendez case documentary, which we are going to help her get to 1 million views
by the end of this year,
right?
Yeah.
But is it by December 31st?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do it. We need to watch it,
ladies and gentlemen,
and everyone else,
and everyone in between.
So tell a friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's literally free. It is 30 minutes, if that, of your time. It goes by really quickly, and it's very informative. So please give it a look. And
all of my former NYC teaching friends who are listening to this podcast because you support and love me as much as you do, please share this beautiful documentary with your students and tell all your colleagues about it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Sandra, it was a pleasure talking to you again. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming on here and telling us all about your work. And we appreciate you continuing to do the work because it's really important work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for what you do and all you're doing. This is wonderful.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. We really appreciate you.
Okay. I hope to see you around on Clubhouse and everywhere in the world.
Oh, this isn't over. We're Mendez maniacs with you now. Whatever you do, we're doing it. Whatever you tell us to do, we're going to do it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Bye.
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 Home. See you soon. Follow us on social media. You can follow our podcast at AFACPod. That's at AFAAK Pod. Or follow our hosts, Minerva at It's Minerva Angel and at Fredo_B on Twitter.